Hi, Deb, and welcome to the Awaken Your Wise Woman podcast.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. It's really fun for me. The thing I love about podcasting is I get to talk to so many amazing women across the globe. And the fact that you and I are sort of neighbors, you're a little closer to home. It's really nice to just feel, I don't know, I guess that the energy that we're creating is just so, I don't know, it's growing, it's building. But
Uh,
for the audience members, the listeners that don't really know who you are and what you do, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself and what inspires you.
yeah. Well, I'm a life coach. I primarily work with people who have a commitment to social justice or spiritual leaders.
Mm.
Um, and that often women, but not always women. But what those folks have in common, or folks who come to work with me have in common, is that they tend to experience life as being pretty heavy and hard. They're very empathetic, so they really care about making a difference in the world. And especially if you add on to that being socialized as a woman and or being socialized with some kind of spiritual path that talks a lot about suffering and sacrificing for others, as that kind of builds up over time, over a lifetime, it can get really, really heavy.
Mm.
Especially most of the people who work with me are like, one of their biggest fears is being selfish. So they don't want to do self-development work. They don't want to feel better in their own life if it's at the cost of someone else, or it's not available to someone else, or there's any possibility of any harm to someone else or to the earth or to animals. Like,
Mm.
they really want everybody to be doing well.
Yeah.
And most of the time haven't found a way to take that care and work it out in the world and also really enjoy their life. And that was my story. So, like many of us, I was
Yes.
searching for the answers myself, and as I found more of them, I naturally wanted to share them with other people and be like, you don't have to do it this way. There's other
Mm.
possibilities. And actually, those other possibilities, I think, have more potential, kind of like what you were saying about this energy, like even just
Mhm.
drawing us together. I'm new to Baltimore. You're not too far away. Like, this energy drawing us together at this moment in time.
Yeah.
Um, that sort of mystical, spiritual, energetic piece, along with like real stuff going on in the world,
Mm.
is where I'm often working.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
you asked what inspired. Oh, and I should say I have a book. So it's
Oh,
called
awesome.
Feel Better, Do Better, a
Nice.
guide for people who want to change the world, but sometimes have trouble making it to lunch. So it's
I love
really
that title. I
yeah,
love
it's
that.
really for that group. And I have 8 Black, Indigenous, and people of color colleagues who contributed
Mm.
an essay to each chapter, because we really wanted it to be coming from more perspectives than just mine. And so that it
Nice.
would hopefully be supportive to a broader range of people. So I'll pause
Beautiful.
there. You asked me about what's inspiring me, but I'll pause because I've talked a lot already.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I just wanted to like go back to the piece you said about um um feeling selfish, not wanting to, wanting so much to help others so that you're not really focusing on what you might need. But I also think like this piece of I might be struggling, but because others are struggling more than me, I don't deserve the right to talk about it, feel it, share it. And I hear that so often in my work. I mean, as a
Yeah.
therapist and as a coach too, like other people have it worse than me. So if I'm wallowing or that's their word, or if I'm stuck
Hmm.
in my sadness, like that's almost selfish.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. Um, I just want to take that in for a minute.
Mm.
because yeah, there's so many different pieces to that, right? So one piece is I listened to one of your podcasts, which was about highly sensitive people.
Mhm.
And so there's that piece around many of the people that work with me have some kind of trait, whether they call themselves highly sensitive or not. There's a sensitive nervous system
Yeah.
that we're just wired with. And so it can make it seem like our needs are ridiculous. They're too
Too
big,
big.
too
Right.
huge, they're too much, they're unfair. And one of the coaches that I've trained with, Martha Beck, I think it was from her that I got this analogy of cars and gasoline
Mm.
of, if you are, she talked about riding in some really fancy, expensive race car with somebody, and that person talking about how high maintenance this car was, like how sensitive it was and how difficult it was. Like you had to have exactly the right gas and you had to use it and manage it in exactly the right way.
Mhm.
And she used that as an analogy to say, like, nobody's getting mad at the car for being so sensitive and needing this particular kind of gas and saying, sorry, like you have to use regular because it's
Right.
just not going to work. Like it's not
I
going to work. And so that, I think that's one piece. One piece is sort of the individual like my system. If my system is sensitive, if I'm very empathetic, I probably have things that are actually needs for my system, but I'm probably labeling them as wants or as excessive. And and I think Julia Cameron's work in The Artist's Way also helped me some with this.
Mhm.
But just when we can say, maybe it's possible that I need quiet in the car.
Yes.
And this is a very specific one. I can give you a very specific, I'm all about cars today for some reason, but my husband and
I love it. I love it.
it was so helpful to me when I was able to, I read something about the highly sensitive person and was able to make sense of this conflict in the car of him wanting like the radio on or something on.
Yeah.
And often me needing it to be like, not just quiet music, like nothing,
Nothing. Yeah. Yeah.
nothing at all. And no like TV on in the background at home and all of that. And when both of us were able to recognize for him, often, especially when driving, stimulation is helpful. Like it
Mhm.
keeps him awake, it keeps him alert. And for me, it's a distraction.
Yeah.
And so we're able to have a conversation where we can actually both get our needs met as best as possible in that moment. So I think
Mhm.
that's one piece. There's this individual, what do I need as a person and can I honor that and call it valid?
Mhm. Mhm.
I think there are also systemic pieces.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that's important to me in my work is that so there also are, I thought as a white social justice oriented woman, I would probably mostly attract white social justice oriented women. And I
Yeah.
have worked with many, but I also have worked with quite a few African American women. And that surprised me. But part of what I've found and heard from them, and that also impacted why we added more voices to the book. Because when I first wrote the book, I thought, am I writing this to a white woman, to a white audience? Is this
Right.
just for white people? And I had some of these clients actually read the book and give me feedback and say, no, this is for us too.
Okay.
Part of what I see is that because of the work that I've done, and it's ongoing work,
Always.
around
Yeah.
race and gender in my own life,
Yeah.
there is a way in which I'm at least able to have an awareness and context, that the space I hold includes an awareness that you might be working with something because just of something individual, like you're having trouble um, owning what you want just because of your own individual situation or your individual family, or this, what we just talked about, not being really able to see your needs as valid. But that's
Uh-huh.
within a context, right? It's within a
Right.
context of a patriarchal society, and it's within a context of a white supremacist racist society and other things, capitalist, etc.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And so part of what we're able to do also that I think is so important is when we can start to see the both and,
Mm.
it's so much more powerful. And I know you do this in your work, from what I've
Yeah.
seen of yours. It's
Yeah.
so much more powerful when we can have that understanding and compassion for ourselves. Like, yeah, and it makes sense that you don't know what you need.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you were socialized as a woman
Yep.
not to know what you need. You were socialized to be silent. You were socialized to not need much so you could marry well. Like, you
Right.
were socialized. And if you are a woman and an African American woman in the United States,
Yeah.
um, and especially if you're someone who has worked your way up to some level of leadership, part of how you've done that is by being a good Black person.
Right.
Part
Right.
of that means you don't make a fuss. You
Yep.
don't quote unquote play the race cards. You don't. So there's all these reasons why you're silent and you don't know what you need that make total sense. And
Yeah.
so there's that combination of, there's all these reasons. You are not broken. You are not the problem. There are problems that are a lot bigger than you.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you have so much power of
Yeah.
choice. Regardless of how many things are coming against you, you have so much power of choice. But I think part of what's important in the context that we create, and that's been important for me, and I'm still doing it in a very messy way and making mistakes and trying again,
Mm-hmm.
is in a lot of the self-help, wellness, spiritual communities, they're often, the ones I'm in are mostly white woman dominant. I know there are white male dominant ones, but I've kind of avoided them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
I hear
so
you.
it's having that context of awareness that as a white woman, I do have a white woman, a highly educated, I have so many privileges.
Right.
Um,
Right. For sure.
and so being able to have those conversations out loud while we're also talking about the individual inner work, I think
Mm.
is essential to being able to dissolve the burdens that feel so heavy, and find new ways forward. So that
Yeah.
was another long answer.
No, but beautiful though. I loved the bringing the context into it because I think, um, there's this thread of we've come so far and things aren't so bad for us anymore as women. We don't need to point out the fact that there are so few women in positions of leadership or Black women in positions of leadership, and how that shapes the conversation around work and productivity and what we're supposed to be doing, um, and how we feel about our needs. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and the growing body of research around trauma,
Yes.
around how trauma from generations back is still impacting us, like at a cellular level, not just from like the way my mother raised me is connected to the way her mother raised her, but also like literally in our cells, in our
Yeah.
bodies.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that
I just,
also, yeah.
yeah. I just read an article in the Washington Post today about a researcher who has been doing research around what she calls weathering. And it's basically like the impact of all the systems on less advantaged, disadvantaged humans. So, like from conception and your mother carrying the burden of, is there enough food, or what's happening outside me? Am I going to be accosted or hurt or whatever, through your own lived experience? But basically, like, we're aging our bodies faster because at a cellular level, we're degrading what's happening because we're living in that sense of heightened stress, and it impacts people who are less advantaged way more than more privileged people. And that just struck me. I like texted the article to myself, so I remember to dive in a little more deeply of the woman who wrote the book, whose name I can't remember right now, but as I was reading it, I was like, of course it's a woman who's bringing this forward into the world. It's like, hey, we need to treat everyone better in a more equitable way across the board, because we're killing ourselves, right? As a culture, as a people, especially here in the Western world. That kind of a sidetrack there, but I just felt like that was somewhat relevant.
Absolutely. And when we do that, that's the crazy thing, that in the US, in the political conversation right now, particularly around like curriculum in the schools, et cetera, there's a lack of understanding that when we do that, when we create this world where the people with the highest number of challenges thrive,
Yeah.
we all get better. It's like the opposite of like that, I forget that saying about the boats, one boat rises, the other boats rise. That's not the saying, but that's the idea.
Okay.
Like, but that was sort of more like, if I can get ahead, I'll bring the rest of you up with me.
Yeah.
But this idea of, if we focus on centering the people who are least likely, and not in a savior way, that's the other tricky piece.
True. That is
Right.
so
Not
true.
coming in.
Yes.
And that's what Aminata Soul, I think, has been such a great teacher for me, the person who introduced us, because she's an African-American woman, and she has really strongly come to me. If I get anywhere near like some kind of saving, she's like, I don't need saving. Like, I am a powerful being. I chose to be in this world having this life. I don't need your saving.
Yes. Yes.
But I'm happy to have you come alongside. I'm happy to, and yeah, just definitely acknowledge that on this earth, on this plane, is a very different experience to be in a Black woman's body than in mine.
Yes.
But I definitely came in and can fall into that saving piece. And it's a very fine line between saving and centering as strong, as worthy of respect, as already resourced, whether it's a community or an individual, but acknowledging, as we're centering, that the reason we're doing that is because so often there's marginalization, right? So we're putting into the center groups that are typically on the edges. And when we do that, it's actually better for everyone. Like the research that shows that when more women have money and power, communities benefit. Like lots of people benefit. There's actually research that shows that.
Right.
So it's and in my own life, I'm like, it's just so much better. It's so much more fun.
So much more interesting.
So much more interesting. Yeah, there really is this incredible strength in diversity, like really, really, not just like as a catchphrase.
No, it just is so much richer, I think. Like the returns are richer almost, right? Like, I mean, that sounds so capitalistic, but we receive the benefits of, we, as in white women, white people. This feels like I'm stepping off a cliff here, but it's not, yes, of course, we can't hold all the power. That's not tenable. I mean, it can't continue, right? But by bringing more people into powerful spaces, it's better for everybody.
Yeah, it is better for everybody. And I appreciate that you were like, oh, this is feeling like I'm maybe like, I don't know how to talk about this, because of course we don't know how to talk about it. We're not supposed to talk about it.
I know. I know. I know.
And we're in this cancel culture too, where if the wrong soundbite gets out there, often there's like really harsh critique. And we're going to, if we talk out loud about race, we're going to make mistakes.
Yep.
Um, we're going to say something that causes harm. And that's going to happen also because people of color are not a monolith.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
So, one person is going to say, yes, I want you to do this work with your people. And another person is going to say, no, you shouldn't be doing it. I should be paid to do it, and you
Absolutely.
can't make both of those people happy. And they both are individuals worthy of respect. So
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
it's tricky and it's messy and our traumas come up. Yeah,
Yes.
our traumas
Yes.
come up.
Yes.
Not just
Absolutely.
ours. Like when we try to work in multiracial spaces, which I have a couple colleagues who've been working with me on a group coaching program, Feel Better, Do Better group coaching program. And one of them, we were moving towards being really kind of a co-created thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very like, this is so great. It's so wonderful. We love it. It's so good. And there's still so much of that for us, but we hit like really unexpected, deep things coming up,
Yeah.
trying to be in this interracial space together, holding space for people to grow. Um,
Mm.
so there are reasons also why we tend not to do that,
Yeah.
that are practical, it was harder to recruit because we were keeping a commitment to 50% people of color in the group.
Yeah.
So that made marketing trickier. So there were challenges from like our deep stuff coming up with each other
Right.
to like, this is harder to market and harder to price. And
Yeah.
yeah, so
Mm.
we're not meant to be able to do this well in this context.
Mm.
Ah,
Yeah. Well, we really haven't, I don't know if taught is the right word, but we really haven't learned how to do it equitably, at least. All right. I also feel again like I'm stepping off a cliff here. It's not what we know yet, I guess is what I'm trying
yeah,
to say.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. And I love that you
Hmm.
added yet.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not
I
what we
mean,
know yet.
yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that that's the truth, right? That we are learning and hopefully working to do better. Um, you shared in a little personal aside of the form that I filled out, or you filled out for talking to me about um, when you first came to this work, that here I'm going to quote you, you sacrificed your way to making a difference in the world.
Mhm.
And I think, well, I love that you put that out there and that you found that's not the way to go. But two, like for me, there is a part of me entering into this work for myself and for the world that I felt like the only way to do it well was to sacrifice myself. And that terrified me. I was like,
Mhm.
I don't know if I have the bandwidth, the capability, the being highly sensitive. Like it felt overwhelming just stepping in the door.
Yeah. Yeah. And are you talking especially about doing work around anti-racism or
Yes.
like yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's so common and really resonates for me too.
Yeah.
Ah, and I love that you brought it up. So I think one of the things, there's a couple things that come to me when I think about that quote and sacrificing my way to make the world better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of them for me was I really came to, because of my upbringing, which was very conservative Christian, and where like being a feminist was a bad word. I was socialized that I should stay home with my children. I didn't get like the most extreme version. Like my parents supported me going to college, but still ultimately kind of the idea was I would probably end up staying home, or maybe I would be a teacher or a nurse, but
Yeah.
it was very gendered. So I came to some concerns about race and racism in high school, just in little moments. And then went to a conservative Christian college. And there was a way in which I think for me, starting to challenge the status quo around race was
Mhm.
safer than starting to challenge the status quo around gender.
Oh,
And that
interesting.
fits really well with sacrificing, because as a woman, you're already socialized to sacrifice yourself for children. You know, mothers especially get so much credit for sacrificing everything for their children, right? Which is, I
Totally.
really want to change that narrative. I would
Yeah.
love to see that change in my lifetime. Um, so I had it from there, like it's good to sacrifice. And then I had the Christian version, it's good to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Um, and so I came into work around race very much with the savior view and with the sacrificing view. And actually, I was in kind of the yuppie generation. And I came out of college with a commitment to downward mobility. Like that would actually be helpful. If I would be more poor, that will help people. And I
Wow.
have to say, I am still trying to work that out of my system. Like I really have a very strong internal drive to not thrive financially, like not
Wow.
consciously anymore, but
Oh, no, but
internally,
it
like
shows
that
up. Yeah.
perpetual sacrifice. Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. And then I loved that one of my clients was the one who actually added the word perpetual, because I used to say it's not about sacrifice and suffering. She added the word perpetual because sometimes there is a sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes there's something that's not really a sacrifice, but it's a letting go that feels really painful. And if we
Mm,
haven't done a lot of that, we might call it a sacrifice. You know, like
mm.
I think for white people, as an example, you know, letting go of like a favorite movie that when we watch it again, we realize, oh my gosh, the
Yeah.
racial bias in this is atrocious. I
Yeah.
can't love this movie anymore. It's
Hmm.
not a sacrifice, but it is a letting go that
Yeah.
is painful. It has some pain in it. There's some loss in it.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but that was one of the things that came to mind when you
Yeah,
talked about that.
but interesting that you're recognizing, or you recognize that it was almost easier, that might not be the right word, um, to move towards sort of social justice, anti-racism versus genderism, because that was so ingrained in how you were raised and family and expectations and all of that, where kind of stepping to the side, like, well, maybe if I do this work, it
Mm-hmm.
feels more comfortable for within the context of who I am in my known world, right? Of how I was
Yes.
raised. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that you just reminded me of, which was part of where I was going with that, is it also aligned well with my commitment to shame.
Mm,
Like,
mm,
because I could just stay with, I am a sinner. I should feel ashamed. So as a white person, you know, I'm
yeah.
always in the wrong.
Yeah.
It's always my privilege. And that's not true either. And it's not helpful.
No,
Um,
no.
and I was really stuck in that shame, which is another piece of how I came to the work of coaching and left a tenure track job and, you know, like went on this
Wow.
very different path. And I
Mm,
also should say my husband's African American and we've been married 28 years. So
mm,
there's been a closeness to the African American community because of my marriage. But even within that and having two children, I mostly for 20 years was stuck in my job as a white person is to feel guilty.
yeah. Right.
Like, which isn't supportive to any cause. And
No.
it's connected to what you said about capacity. I don't think you use the word capacity, but it's very much connected in my experience. My journey has been that, and actually, Aminata Soul is one of the places where I learned this, that I had to come to the place where I could have a boundary and not assume that everything related to racism, when I heard about it on the news, when I saw it, was my responsibility.
Yeah.
So I had to come to the place where I could pause and check in with myself, not look away, but feel the pain. So there were several pieces. I had to pause.
Yeah.
I had to practice my capacity to feel the pain, not turn away from it.
Yep.
I had to learn how to do that. I had to learn how to move pain through my body and grief, which is also, it's about sounding. It's about moving your body. It's about things that also have been shut down in our culture. Like, you're not supposed to like start shaking. We say shake it off, but don't actually shake.
Don't actually move, right?
Yeah. So moving, sounding.
Or if you just move your hands, that's okay.
Yeah, that might be okay, especially down low, but not up high. Yeah. So yeah, like learning to pause, to feel, to process, whether that's moving or sounding or calling a white friend usually is better, who can help me process, who won't just like, who understands the work and will help me process. And then coming to a place where I notice like, okay, I've calmed my nervous system. I've felt the grief and the pain of having seen this, or heard about what just happened, or come to a new awareness that I didn't have before. And then deciding, what is my action to take? And sometimes the action to take is just what you already did, that you stayed with the pain, you didn't look away, you felt it. Maybe you prayed if you have some kind of prayer practice. Sometimes you might feel a nudge to a bigger action. But I think one of the things that happens for us, at least I've seen it over and over with white women especially, is we go, oh my gosh, that's too much. And like, especially I'm too sensitive. I'm too much of an empath. I can't. Well, that's learned victimhood, which is also part of our gender,
Right.
of our gender conditioning. So we can, it doesn't mean you can in this moment, but you can increase your capacity. You can increase your emotional capacity not to turn away.
Yeah.
You can increase your capacity to take actions. Like, these are learnable skills. And I think that's something I didn't know for a long time. I didn't know that I could learn. I could stay sensitive. I don't watch the news. I don't read a lot of the news. Like, I'm very low on my level of news that I take in.
Me too.
But I am more able now not to look away when something comes to me, and to let it land, to let myself feel it, to process it through, and then to decide, what's my action? Do I have an action to take?
Yeah.
And it can be tiny steps. So I think that's the piece. It's like we make it into this big thing, which stops us. Oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm brave enough to go march in the streets. Okay. Like, nobody said that was your next step.
Right. Yes. Yeah. You do not have to be at the head of the crowd with the banner screaming for social justice. Yeah.
There is a beautiful children's book by this amazing poet. It's called A Quiet Roar Can Change History. And right now the name of the poet is escaping me. And there's an interview with her on the On Being podcast.
I can look it up and add it in the show notes.
But I loved it because it's a poem that became a children's book, but it's this story of this little girl whose parents are activists, and I think her brother goes out with them, and she sits behind a chair in the living room and just sort of, she's listening, but like, she's like in the corner, quiet. but what she ends up doing is making the signs. She comes out from behind the chair and she has these signs
Mm.
that they take with them.
That's
And I'm
very
getting
sweet.
chills as I share
I was
that.
going to say,
for
I'm
her.
getting teary just you talking about it.
Yeah. Because it's back to where we started, right? Honoring what
Yes.
kind of car are you? What
Right,
kind of
right.
human are you? Your kind of human matters to do your work in
Yeah.
your way. You don't have to do it a different way.
So important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
Oh, I'm gonna take that in for myself again.
I know, I know, I know. Yes, yes, yes. And I love that you've
Mm.
given us the space to just given us permission to take the space to take that in. Because that's beautiful. Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I would love, I know at the very beginning I asked you like what does inspire you and we got
Mm.
going, but I don't want to leave that behind. That
Mhm.
feels important to come back to. And then I'm going to ask you to share a piece of wisdom that you feel like you would like to share for the listeners too.
Okay. Many, many things inspire me. I'll start with what I'm seeing out my window: trees,
Mm,
um, light, light coming through trees at dusk and dawn, um, light on water, light just doing all the things that light does.
mm,
Um, so just so many aspects of nature, but especially trees, light, and light on water. And yeah, different little spots of earth that I'm learning to connect with. Um,
mm,
and also, what really inspires me right now, or some of the people who really inspire me right now, are people who are joyful and thriving themselves and working for, I don't even like this phrasing, like working for justice is not exactly the right, they might be working for justice. They might also be just quietly dissolving systems that harm the earth. But like people who are doing big, important work that to do it requires feeling a lot of pain and heartbreak. Like if we really look at what's happening,
yeah.
we can't help but feel pain and heartbreak, who are doing that and who are finding these embodied ways to move it through and community ways to support each other, and are also thriving to include financially. Honestly, right now, I'm really looking for the people who are also thriving financially.
Yes.
But some of the people, Adrienne Marie Brown is one. Her book, Pleasure Activism, is all about this journey
Mm,
around being an activist and also being in pleasure, including really taboo topics of pleasure. I like sex and drugs, and
yeah.
I trained with Layla Martin, who is a sex, love, and relationship coach. And, her work in kind of neo tantra, like again, sexuality, money, power.
Mm,
There are reasons why these things became taboo. We're coming up on Halloween. There are reasons why that holiday and witches became like a bad thing, because there was power, there was influence, there's life force energy
yeah.
available to us if we move, if we can sound, if we can embrace our crownness, connected
Yes.
to your work, right? Like
Love it.
the middle-aged crones, if we can, if we're in our power, if we're speaking, if we're acting, that's really dangerous for the status quo. So the people who are doing that inspire me, the ones who've gone before us,
Mm,
um, and the ones who are here now: Michelle Obama, Gloria Steinem, Krista Tippett on Being Network, an example of a very different way to do that.
yeah.
Aminata Soul absolutely
Mm,
is one of those. Desiree Adaway. There's
mm,
so many, honestly, because of where I choose to be. the
Yeah.
circles I choose to operate in, it feels to me like we're everywhere. The people who are doing this work with joy.
Yes.
Um,
Mm.
and when I get out of my little bubble, I realize we're not quite. I mean, we might be everywhere, but we're still pretty undercover
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
bigger,
Yeah. I
in the
feel
bigger
right.
picture.
I feel like the energy is leaching outwards, but the bubble is still yeah, relatively
Yeah,
small, but it's
yeah,
growing. I mean,
absolutely.
it's big, but it's just not exposed as much as I would like it to be, or whatever, as
It's
visible.
growing. I really think it's growing. And I also think that we get a choice as a human collective about what gets fed. And we're still in that choice. We're in that, I think we're in an in-between where
Yeah.
we're kind of choosing as a collective what paradigm we want to operate under. But I
Okay.
love being around, it's often women and gender non-conforming folks, but there are some men. My husband is like coming, like he's definitely in there.
Nice.
And so yeah, like the people who are nurturing this, like dissolving, not so much of the fighting. I love, you also talked about changing the name of your podcast.
Mm.
So it's not that there's never a reason to fight, but like I'm really uncomfortable with it for the most part, but like being really courageous in our work
Mm.
around dissolving taboos and
Yeah.
speaking out and being really courageous in loving. I think that's the other piece. I was inspired by people in these last couple weeks who spoke out immediately in support of both hurting Palestinians and hurting Israelis.
Me too.
When it
Me
was
too.
not okay on social media
I
to give
know.
any support
Yep.
to hurting Palestinians. It was, you were only, as an American, supposed to talk about supporting Israelis. More
Yeah.
people are more balanced now because of what's been happening, but
Yeah.
the people who were brave enough to speak out from the beginning and say, I'm loving everybody here. And like,
Right.
how do we do that? How do we
Well,
make
and
it way?
right. And I saw, of course, social media meme like Palestinians and Hamas are not equal. That's not the same thing, right?
Right.
As well as Israelis and the Israeli government. They're not like
Not the
this is
same.
about the people who are
Yeah.
suffering because of this conflict. The
Yeah.
people
Yeah. Well,
who
and
have continued to suffer for a long time. Anyway, yes.
yes. And can I say one more thing that's coming up for me related to that? Do we have
Sure.
time for one more?
Sure, sure.
What's coming up for me is also, in my experience, I was working with a very personal conflict, kind of political conflict in my family of origin between me and someone else.
Mm.
And so I also have been very much in this space of, wow, I want this on a larger scale. I've got to do it within myself. And I think you have another podcast about internal family systems, like this conflict.
Yeah.
So seeing it on all those levels, like where am I not loving this part of myself or these two parts that are in conflict? How do I love them both in myself, in my internal psyche? Then
Yeah.
how do I do this in my family
Mm.
with this family member and myself, where like it's so hard for us to understand and hear each other.
Yeah.
And then feeling how that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it is a war between nations. And Israel and Palestine aren't the only ones, right?
No.
So
Yep. Yep.
again, feeling that like connection of all of this work, it's all connected. We can't just do the micro work and say that'll solve everything, but we can't do the big work without the micro work, and the community work, and it's just all part of that.
Yeah.
How do we
Yeah.
create a world where we love all the parts?
Yes, yes, right. All the parts, all the people, all the, yeah. Mm, hmm. Yeah, I really feel that. But I love yeah, the micro work has to happen, right? For us to
Mhm.
be able to approach the bigger work. the parts,
Yeah. And that
right, the work
it's
will be
not an
done.
either or even a like, do this first, then that. Like, I feel like it's like with a lot of things, it sort of weaves in and out, and we might have a time, like, I think I'm coming out of a time where I've been really deep in for a few years, kind of in my cave, doing a lot of internal work. And I'm
Mhm.
feeling like I need to get out more now, you know,
Right,
but I
right.
needed that for a while. And so there can be these,
Yeah,
ebbs and flows of that, but I think it's always weaving together.
I agree. I agree. And is there, I mean, you shared so much wisdom throughout our
Mm.
conversation, but if there were something that maybe either you haven't said or you would like to reiterate as far as a piece of wisdom for the listeners, what might that be?
Yeah. Let me take a moment here.
Mm.
I think the thing that's coming to me right now is learn how to process your emotions through movement and sound.
Mm. Yeah.
And there's tons of resources. Like, you could Google it. You can use the word somatic, like
Yes. Yes.
find a somatic therapist. Like, you can do this with huge amounts of support, or even just in the tiniest way. Like, the tiniest thing would be, next time you feel really upset, turn on a song and dance, even if you don't dance.
Right.
Or like what we were talking about, just shake, or just go
Right.
like
Like,
the sounds that we want to make, but we don't make. Like,
yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
smallest thing, but it's so huge. And it's one of the things that, again, back to the bigger picture, colonialism shut down cultures that had
Oh,
practices that
right.
included movement and sound and sexuality. We won't go
Yeah.
farther into that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yes. Yes. Yes.
start with moving and sounding and just see what happens. See what happens if you move and sound.
I love that. I love that. I just recently found or was shown some Qigong, I think that's how you say it,
Mm,
movement.
mhm.
There's a woman who offers a whole lot of free videos on that. So if I can find them, I'll add those to the show notes too, because it is all about moving your body. And even if there isn't anything coming up, it just moves stuff through when
It
you
does.
move.
It does. Like, it literally, and I am like geek nerd, like sit at the computer, sit with my book all day long, never move my body. Like, it takes intentionality for me to move,
Yeah.
and it is life changing. It's life changing. So
Yeah.
especially if you're one of those like me,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
extra
Yeah.
important. Yeah, you don't even have to have like a new story, a new therapized affirmation, whatever. Like, you can
Yeah.
move your body and you will have moved something
Yes.
emotional and energetic.
Yeah.
And that will
Does
help.
not have to be a conscious, like, I'm going to get release this thing. It can just be your body doing it for you.
Yes, our bodies know how to do it. Our bodies know how to do it.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just have to let them.
We sure do. We sure do.
Yeah.
Well, Deb, thank you so much. I have enjoyed our conversation and getting to know you and being here with you on the podcast. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.